So Ashish gave us a very technical talk, very entertaining and insightful. But now we're going to switch gears a little bit into product management. And we're going back to Expedia, but with Hiba Helewa from Expedia. She's a project manager there, yeah?
Hey,
quite
guys.
popular. All right.
Okay. Thank you, folks, for this lovely event. And let's start. I think the introduction is quite clear. Okay. So I look at you, and I just gaze around the room, and I'm making an assumption. And that assumption is 100% of you folks here with us today are product managers. And because my observation says that 100% of you are product managers, then I'm just going to be tailoring my talk to just address product managers so that they can be the segment that would leave this talk feeling like they learned something new. Okay. You see what I did there? Does anybody know what I did? Yeah. And I made an assumption, absolutely. And you know what they say about assumptions? Well, if you don't Google it. What I just did right there was just fall into the trap of the first mistake that a product manager can make when making a decision. And you can clearly see if a decision from the get-go is not factual and instead it's an assumption, it can lead with very undesirable results, to say the least. Okay. To get a little bit into the definition of what a product is, just as a general term, what do you folks think a product is, as abstract as possible? Yeah, it can be a solution, it can be an object, it can be any object that the customer can consume or use to fulfill a certain need. And the products can be very general. A car is a product. Expedia is a product where users just log in so that they can actually book travel. Oh, thank you. So now that we understand high level what a product is, then maybe we can help answer the question of what do product managers do? Okay. Product managers are essentially the evangelists of their customers. They're the ones that are constantly making sure that whatever their consumers are using, their needs are actually being fulfilled. And at the same time, while keeping in mind the company goals. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the general definition of what a product is. I think I sort of explained high level what does a product manager do. And what I explained can sound a little bit too general. And you might be wondering, like, okay, great, that's what you folks do, but how do you actually implement it? There needs to be a method to all the madness. And the way I like to think about it, and we like to think about it in Expedia, is the scientific method is actually that method. Okay, so what is the scientific method? And it's in its simplest form, the scientific method is a series of steps that scientists can take in order to be able to predict an outcome to either be a true outcome of a hypothesis or a false outcome of a hypothesis. And we're just going to be walking through these steps of each one independently and sort of digging a little bit deeper. Okay. So as I said, the scientific method is just a list of steps that the product manager can take in order to be able to take sound decisions. What can the scientific method be used for? when trying to deliver solutions or making sure that we're taking the right decisions in our job. For example, we can use the scientific method in order to be able to define what to build. Is any of you familiar with the Lean Startup book? Oh, educated crowd. Okay, so the Lean Startup talks about the concept of an MVP. And an MVP is essentially a minimal viable product, where as a team that's building that particular product, you just spend the minimal time in order to put a product that is viable for customers to test. And that product will just operate with its basic functionality to satisfy its main goal. And what you can gain from all of this minimal effort is extra information so that you'll be able to optimize and create a product that customers actually need. Another thing that the scientific method can help us answer is the question of where to invest. And that's also a general question. Assume I run for example, an e-commerce website, and I want to expand to the MENA region. And I ask myself, based on different observations, would it be a lot of extra effort for me to, for example, implement a cash-on-delivery option? And it takes around 6 months, for example, to deliver. And we don't have that time on our hands as a company, so what do is we can actually put a test on our website for the customers just to be able to capture the intent and basically be able to measure, are those customers are they more likely to purchase from my website if they have that payment option on their site? So that's also something that we can use in order to be able to predict an outcome. What's working? So that's something that is more specific to running features that are not just new concepts or new ideas that we're trying to validate. For example, we can use the scientific method to understand what's working well on our website and what's not working so well. An example of that, for instance, can be if I constantly show a running out soon kind of urgency message to the users that are purchasing electronics off my retail store, then maybe there are merits in me testing the same urgency method for different categories, for example, clothing lines, and being able to verify and then prove or disprove if my hypothesis was actually accurate. That the same applies for what's actually not working on the website. So, a lot of examples. Another thing that we can also verify is general customer behavior. Because customer behavior sometimes changes with time. Trends change. For example, at some point, a couple of years back, all websites were being built desktop, and the behavior of customers started to change. And now, if you're not thinking mobile first, you're not doing so well. So basically, we need to keep an eye on all of these factors and be able to take them into account whenever we're trying to make a conscious decision and a factual decision at that. Okay. Weird, right? Out of context. Trust me, that's not by mistake. I know you all folks had lunch, so I thought maybe it's time for dessert. Anyway, this is a milkshake, obviously, and it's an example that I'm going to be using throughout my talk today. And this is like a very mind-provoking study that was done by Clay Christensen. He's a Harvard professor, and he talks about a fast food chain that were not selling milkshake as much as they would like to. And we're going to be using that example as we move forward, so just keep it in mind. Okay. So we talked about the main steps of the scientific method. Now it's just time for us to dig a little bit deeper in each one independently. So the first one is making an observation. So an observation can be something as general as the sky is blue. Or it can be a little bit more specific and formal, like, why am I not selling enough milkshakes? And those observations are usually data-driven, and they're supported by facts. Because if we go back to what I did, I just walked in and I said, 100 of you folks are product managers. Now let's actually verify that. By show of hands, how many of you folks here today are product managers? Geez, I was so wrong. That's not even 2% of the crowd. But hey, see, that's why we verify. Now that I know that it's only 2% of that crowd that are product managers, I'll try to be a little bit more general so that I can address my talk to everybody who's in maybe software that would actually find any meaning in what I'm saying. So yeah, the core skill of a product manager, just like any scientist, is to actually make an observation. And we collect information from several different areas. So, for example, in our field, we can be collecting information from how users behave on our website. We can be collecting information on what other competitors are doing. We can be collecting observations that we're not selling enough milkshake, for example. What do we need to do in order to boost our sales? So, the different sources where a product manager can actually use in order to make observations can vary widely. For example, we can collect information from customer and performance data. For example, I can have a deep knowledge and understanding on how are customers interacting with my website, or how are customers interacting with my app. Are they spending a lot of time trying to find what they want? Do they like it? Are they coming back? Am I losing them to competitors? All of those are the kind of questions that we always want to know, and it depends on the target or the goal that we're solving for. This is the data that we sort of try to dig into to get answers. Talking to customers. Never underestimate the power of connecting and having a personal relationships with your customers. Even if it just means giving your product to your friends, to your family, and let them use it and hear from them, see what they have to say about it. If you're even more curious and you work in a bigger company, you can go and you can actually listen in to customer support calls. You can learn a lot by how customers are interacting with your product. You can understand their pain points, you can understand their delights. And based on that, you will be able to amend your solution, amend your product so that you'll ensure that you're constantly actually meeting the needs of your customers. You can study the industry and techniques. Like I said, you can be curious into why are certain retailers adopting a certain feature. Maybe there are merits in me testing it myself. What is other travel industries doing? What do I need to know in order to expand my product? All these kind of questions, you can depend on studying the industry techniques to learn more. User research. I talked a little bit about you as a product person going directly and interacting with customers and getting deeper information from customer support calls and all of that. There's another angle to this because sometimes you can refer to some user research. And what does that mean? It means that whether you as a product manager or you work with a researcher, you can have, for example, a list of users of segments that you actually choose. You can talk to them, you can try to understand from them how are they comprehending the product that you're showing them. Are they being able to discover it? Do they even see value in it? Are they delivering the message that you're trying to convey? And all of these data points can actually help you even take more decisions. There are some cool features about user research, especially if you have user labs and you're in a bigger company. There are some tools that actually get plugged in to the human's face, and it measures the eyes, the movement, emotions, and that sort of technology can even help us detect the delight factor and being able to take a decision of, if I put that product out there for my customer, are they going to be happy? It's a very simple question, but it's a very hard it's a very hard question to answer. And now with tools like these at our disposal, it's becoming very possible for us to go there. Okay, so we talked about different research types. How can I gather observations? And what do I do with that observation? What's the outcome? The outcome is data. And the kind of data depends on the kind of research that I'm doing. So for example, in the case of our fast food joint that's not selling enough milkshakes, what was their data? What was their observation? Their observation was, it's such a quantitative information because what they're saying is, we're not selling as much milkshake as we forecasted we would. And as simple as that, that's a starting point for them to say, we need to boost that because based on our observation, we know that we have a problem there. Which takes us to the second point of the scientific method, or the second step. What's the second step? It's the hypotheses, which basically means it's making a guess. It's a prediction of if I understand the problem from the observation that I defined, and if I put something out there and I test it, what would be the outcome? And at this point, it's still a hypothesis. So we still don't know whether we prove the hypothesis to be right or wrong, and we just need to wait until we test it out and capture the results. So, for example, and going back to the milkshake, those folks in the milkshake sales booster team just had a meeting. And they sat together and they were brainstorming, and what they said was, okay, in order for me to boost the sales of my milkshake, then what I need to do is I need to understand how do the customers that experience my milkshake like it, and what do they like to see extra in that milkshake so that they can purchase it again. And this is the sort of hypothesis that they had high level, and then they said, if we understand why customers like the milkshake, then we will be able to amend our product, and by that we will be able to boost the sales. Okay, fair enough. That sales booster team left the meeting and they said, okay, now we have a plan and we're going to fix all our problems. They sat together and they decided, okay, let's execute. But then they looked at the elements of a good hypothesis. And what they realized was, at high level, they have everything that they need. They have the prediction, and they have the assumption that if they just fix their product, if they just fix their milkshake, then they would just be able to boost the sales. But then they look at each other and be like, okay, but then where we start? Which milkshake do we fix? What are the things that we need to do in order to be able to boost our sales? So if we want to articulate a hypothesis a bit better, then what we will focus on is the hypothesis is a prediction of what will happen if you make one change to a problem worth solving and test the outcomes. So one change here is very important. And in the case of the sales booster team, what they did was they sat together again and they said, okay, do we know what's the kind of milkshake that sells most? So that we'll know which kind of milkshake do we want to improve so that we can then measure if we're actually boosting the sales of that line. And if it was true, if our hypothesis was true, then we would just implement the same logic to the rest of the milkshake kinds. So what they did was they deduced that chocolate milkshake was their highest seller. And they decided that they need to improve the chocolate milkshake based on what users would like to see in that chocolate milkshake, and based on that, they would be able to then uplift their sales. So what those folks did, they thought about the data that they have, and they realized, oh, I have my quantifiable data, which is I'm not selling enough. And I have another quantifiable data that also tells me chocolate milkshake is my highest selling milkshake, and that's the product line that I want to improve. But there is another data point that's completely missing, which is what are the things that my customers like in general to see in a chocolate milkshake, so that I'll know what are the elements that I need to amend or add to my current product so that I can uplift my sales. And in that example, what was missing is some sort of their qualitative data. And qualitative data is the data that's hard to measure. It's more like feelings and trying to deduce emotions, which are also very important whenever you're trying to make a decision on a consumable that has to do with how users feel, and sort of the goal of it is to take them there. So what those folks did, they brought in a lot of like personas of milkshake lovers, and they just sat them down and they kept on asking them questions. For the chocolate milkshake, what do you like to see? Do you want to have more banana in it? Do you want it to be chunkier, more chocolatey? What are the things that you want? And they managed to identify that maybe having a stronger chocolate flavor is going to do the trick. And so they went back and they amended their product and they just added more chocolatey flavor to their milkshake. Okay. Now we move to the third step of the scientific method, which is testing. Because up until this point, all we know is we collected observations, we defined based on that observation our problem statement, and then we had a hypothesis that what is the one thing that if I fix, then I will be able to solve that problem. And testing is the way to do that. And let's talk now a little bit more about testing and what are the kind of testings that people can do. In the case of that fast food joint, what they're going to do is they're just going to amend their product and they're just going to wait until they capture results to be able to see, did they actually increase the sales of their chocolate milkshake or did it really do nothing? And in tech and our industry, we're actually very lucky because all this data is at our disposal and it's actually something that we can take decisions on very quickly. And by that, be able to make sound decisions and move on and move faster. And that's why adopting any scientific method in our industry is a must, because it tells you if you're failing, then you know, you understand, you learn why you're failing, you fail fast, and then you move on to the next example. The same might not apply to McDonald's or any fast food chain that's actually adopting and trying to amend their milkshake. Okay. So testing, especially as product managers, we spend a lot of our time doing that, running our tests and being able to get opinions out of the way. Because when we have tests and we have data, then our observations, our hypotheses, and our results are all factual. And so it's a very democratic decision. If any product manager decides that they see something that's not working right, they make an assumption, they work hard in order to gather data to solidify their assumption, and based on it, build just a hypothesis of, if I fix something, then how am I going to make my product better? And then I just put it out for testing. Okay, so testing. How do I know what to measure, and how do I know if I'm testing the right thing or am I testing in the right way or not? Any of you folks are familiar with the concept of A/B testing? Yes. Okay, good, not bad. Anyway, I'll just explain for the rest because we're trying to be very inclusive and not generalize. And A/B testing is basically if it's a test of a hypothesis and that hypothesis includes one change, and if it's on a website, then what I actually do is I split my traffic. And by traffic, I mean the users that are actually visiting my website or my page. And 50% of those users will be able to see my product as is, without the amendment or the feature or the hypothesis that I'm trying to test. And the other 50% are the subjects that are going to be exposed to the feature or the change that I think is my hypothesis and it's what I want to prove or disprove. And what I do is I let that test run for a while. And a while means until the test is statistically significant. Now that we have tools to help us deduct if the test has run long enough and if we're ready to identify and get results and see, okay, did I get the learning that I was expecting or not? And we can distribute the types of A/B testing into 3 main types. The first type that we can talk about is a smoke test, which essentially help us answer the question of, should I invest in something before I build it or not? And for example, if I want to add a new feature, like I talked about when I started talking about the concept and what can we predict with with the scientific method, then a smoke test can be something that I can just put on my website and be able to see if customers will be interested in it or not. Another type of test is feature qualifications. Feature qualifications basically means if I want to introduce something new to my website, like for example, that payment method, it's something that I want to have there. Is, for example, the checkout page the right place for me to actually put that feature or not? Should I consider somewhere else? So using the same logic of A/B testing, I would put it out there, I would let it run for a while, and then I would be able to measure my results, and based on that, I'll make a decision, I was right or I was wrong, and what to do next. Another thing is feature optimization. Feature optimization is mostly for features that are already launched on the website, that they are performing well, but we think they can do better. And so we can just keep on making amendments and clarifying the product, trying to help increase the customer's willingness to pay for that product or that feature, and we keep on iterating. So these are the main types of A/B tests that we can use in our industry. The last step of the scientific method is learning the outcome. And learning the outcome can either be, my hypothesis was true, which means that the assumptions that I have made, that this is the solution to fixing the problem that I know is worth fixing, is correct. And what do I do with that learning? Because I tested on a small sample, for example, that 50%, then I will take a conscious decision to say, okay, now I'm ready to know that this is something that 100% of my customers are going to be seeing, and by that I expect to boost my sales by X%. So this is what I would do with such a learning. Another outcome, of course, of the learnings can be, sorry, I already talked about these, so. Another outcome of the learning can be that my test was a loser. And what that says is, I put my feature out there, I was expecting it to boost my sales, but instead I find that my sales have declined. So what that essentially tells me is, my hypothesis was wrong. So what I would do in that case is, I would go back, I would collect the team, and we would just sit and try to understand what was the learning from this test. What is that test telling me, and what are the things that I need to do in order to create a new hypothesis so that I can retest and measure if I'll be right this time or not? Because see, the hypothesis can change. It's an opinion, it's a guess. The observation doesn't. The observation is a solid fact that has been made and that has been solidified with facts. And that's what we do with a loser test. And we generally love to get loser tests because there's huge learning in loser tests, and it's a great leeway for us to understand our customers, to understand our business, and what are the things that we need to do in order to improve. And there's also the kind of testing which is inconclusive results. We don't like those. And what inconclusive results usually say is, maybe your hypothesis altogether was wrong, because you're getting no outcome, there was no learning, but the observation is still accurate. So before we get to the milkshake example, let's just go through some of the A/B testings that we can run at Expedia. For example, there was an observation that people would be more likely to check the left pane menu of their web page. And that observation was made based on some qualitative data. And so the test was that we just moved the module, we flipped it to the other side. And we kept that test running. What do you folks think that the outcome of that test would be? Do you think that I managed to sell more and make customers convert higher on my test segment or versus my control, which is the original variant? Any ideas? You like the control? Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we thought as well. So you think that's going to win? Because I just moved it. Okay, more opinions, guesses. Side is more attractive. Interesting.
I think users like what they're used to. So on the left side, they're used to the control, which is it's on the right side, not on the left side.
Yeah.
Like e-commerce sites, it's usually on the right side, which is the payment methods or the checkout.
Impressive, interesting.
I believe it's more language oriented.
Yeah.
Since this website is, I believe it's more in language oriented.
Now,
Because since the website is written in English,
yeah,
it's better to be in the left side. The left side is more important.
yeah.
If it was in Arabic,
Then it can be flipped. Absolutely, that also makes sense. Yeah. It looks like it. Because what's really interesting about this is that we're actually seeing sort of the same distribution of conflicting opinions. So yeah.
I think that the standard is the control, but the benefit of the standard is that it's usually where I will look to check what I will pay for.
Yeah.
But for the second one, I think that people, when they start looking at a web page, they start from the left.
Yeah.
So it's fine to have this one, but I think that the benefit of the second one is I know what I'm paying for before I start writing.
Yeah, that also makes so much sense. And I think if I look at the distribution, it's sort of 50-50 in the room, which actually reflects the results that we found on that test. So actually, that test was inconclusive. What does that mean? It means that 50% of the users maybe that we're using said, yes, that one on the left works so well. The other 50% said, but no, the one on the right is fantastic. And what we concluded when we kept that test running long enough is changing these does not change anything. And the learning there, we were looking at the wrong place in order for us to make a decision to help the conversion rate. So of course, you'll meet again, you'll discuss those learnings, and you move on to the next step. And now there's no one that's married to this idea, because I'd be obsessing about it. I'd be talking to the team like, you guys, if we fix this, we're going to be changing the world. And then we run the test and we get this. And it'd be like, okay, clearly we were super wrong. Let's move on to the next idea. So another example, which is selling insurance on our website. So yeah, cheers. Anyway, what we as an insurance team thought that when we implemented this was we wanted to increase the sales of insurance on our website, but at the same time, we don't want to really impact the conversion of, for example, the flights line of business path. So what we said was, maybe we should just add a forced choice option. A forced choice means, as you're checking out, as you're entering your customer information, your traveler information, your payment information, all this fun stuff, then what we actually say, if you click continue booking, is we stop you and we say, but no, you haven't booked insurance yet. Do you want to tell us if you want to buy it or not? And because we weren't sure, is it just clear if we just add a yes or no with a red asterisk? Or should we be more crisp and explain to the customer to actually select an option so that they're not bothered by the error message that stops them from checking out. And so we ran the test, and if you notice, we have 2 variances in that test. So that means that instead of us splitting the traffic as 50-50, we split it in 33-33-33. And if we're going to be taking another round of guesses, which of the 2 variances do you think would win? And do you even think that this is something that would actually help increase the sales or not? The middle one, because it's straight to the point, it's not too big of a landscape maybe. So yeah, we can take that assumption. A lot of us thought what Dina thought, but then we figured we need to run both, and when we ran it long enough, we understood and learned that selecting an option to continue made more sense. The first variant actually was negative because users didn't actually see that asterisks, and because they were asked to fill in fields that they haven't seen, that was an annoying experience to them, and that's why it was negative, and the other variant was the positive test. So we can keep on doing that forever to try and make a sound decision. So in high level, this is what we actually spend our time doing as product managers, and we try to test as often as possible. We try to test all the observations that we make, all the questions that we're curious about that we believe is going to be groundbreaking and is going to give us the results that is just going to help us move forward in our business. So a couple of things that are also worth pointing out is getting feedback. So getting feedback can be done definitely from A/B testing, because that's a way for us to measure results. You can always get feedback from your customers and then use those learnings to feed it back into the system and make your product better. This is what we can call or refer to as the network effect. Whenever more users come in and they use your site and they use your app, then you learn more about that customer behavior. And if you're good at making those observations and collecting your data, then what you're doing is you're actually building your ecosystem. You're building that habitat where users come in, they experience your product in a certain way, they tell you something either by talking to you or by the data that they leave as traces or breadcrumbs in the tools that you use in order to measure those results. And what you learn from those customers is what you need in order to improve and get better. Now, if we just want to go back to solve that riddle of what happened to that milkshake store. So the test ran for months. And then they thought, that sales booster team, they said, it's time for us to have a meeting. Let's just sit and chat. Let's just see what happened. And they looked at their sales dashboard. And to their disappointment, they noticed that there was no change that was done on the sales of their chocolate milkshake. And they thought about it, and they thought about their hypotheses. And what was their hypotheses? All they said was, if I understand why do people like chocolate milkshake, then I would be able to increase the sales. There was one thing that was very important that they missed. What was the job of that milkshake that they purchased, those customers? Why are those users buying that milkshake? And so when they thought about that observation, or they thought about that problem, that question that they had no idea about, they decided that it's time for them to get to the ground and understand their customers better. So what they did was, they actually went to that fast food chain and they spent 18 hours. And they started observing the people that were coming in and buying those milkshakes. They would take notes on what time are those people coming? What are they wearing? Are they buying something else along with their milkshake, or are they just buying their milkshake alone? Are those folks alone, or are they with a party? Are they coming independently, or do they have kids and family? And they started to collect all sorts of information, and they spent 18 hours. After a very long, exhausting day, the next day they went back and they looked at their data. And what they found was, and this is factual, what they found was 50% of the milkshake sales happened between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. And they were curious to understand, okay, now that we know that this is where the majority of our customers, the timing where the majority of our customers are buying our milkshake, maybe we need to learn a little bit more. So what they did the next day was, they went in very early in the morning so that they make sure they can talk to the people that are buying those milkshakes from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. And then they started talking to them a little bit more closely. Their approach was a little bit scary because imagine when you walk into a store at 7 a.m. in the morning, you leave with your milkshake and there's someone that's coming your way saying, oh, by the way, why did you buy milkshake? So of course, in order not to be super creepy, they needed to sort of change their questions in a way that can make it easier for those people to cooperate with them. And so they asked them a question of, what's the reason that you're buying their milkshake? Is there something specific that you like about that milkshake? And what did you hire that milkshake to do? What was its job? So, and is there something else that you would think about hiring in the morning? So those people would think, and they would say, you know what, actually, usually I used to get a banana, but the banana, it makes me hungry so fast. Other segment of people would say, oh, I used to get a donut. And the donut, the thing about it is, it's great, but it makes my hands all gooey. And what they sort of understand from those users is that they're buying that milkshake because they're on their way to work, and because it's a long drive, it's a boring drive, that milkshake was perfect. Because it was viscous, it was thick, it was something that they can carry in their hand without their hands becoming gooey. They can drive while they have their milkshake on the side, so it doesn't really interrupt their cognitives. And what they learned was that the most important thing that those users cared about was the fact that this milkshake can keep them company in that boring drive because it's thick. And so what they did was, they amended that product, but they amended it in a way that they made sure that this milkshake is going to cover you for around a 25 to 30-minute drive, because its thickness is the exact perfect viscous that you need in order for you to keep that companion as you travel to work, and they actually managed to boost their sales. And that's a true story. You guys should Google it. It's so much fun. It's actually mind-blowing for me. So, yeah, what was the job of a milkshake? The final takeaways, I guess, always start with an observation. A lot of times, an observation can be your own assumption. And especially as product manager or engineers, we're close to our products, and we can use our intuition more often than not to sort of guess, are we going to be right or wrong? But I'll also tell you that there are facts out there that is going to support your assumption. Look for them, build your observation, and move forward. Focus, whenever you're testing a hypothesis, always make sure that you're testing one thing at a time, because you don't want to get so many results that you don't understand what was working, what was not working. It's just a waste of time. I've done it, don't do that. Test often. Like we said, it is our source of truth. It's the only way by which we can eliminate opinions, and always learn and use the feedback to improve your products. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Very nicely done. Really enjoyed that, how you can be an investigator inside the organization and try to find out the reasons why a milkshake does what it does.
Exactly.
I employ a milkshake personally to get in my belly.
Exactly.
That's what I prefer.
Exactly.
But thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I'm sure you'll be around if anybody wants to approach you, right?
I will. Yes, thank
Great.
you, folks.
And so from going to selling milkshakes, obviously when you walk into a store, the person on the other side, which is the merchant, has to sell you that milkshake, and usually you use something called a POS, a point of sale.